Who would you have been if you were aboard the Titanic? This wasn't just a maritime disaster, it was a cold, calculated lottery of survival. And your fate, it depended on your class, your gender, your job, and the invisible value society placed on your life. On April 15, 1912, over 1,500 souls were lost in the freezing Atlantic. But make no mistake, this wasn't about bad luck. It was about who you were, where you stood, and how fast you could run when the unthinkable happened. Step aboard. Walk the grand staircase. Feel the panic in third class. Hear the orders shouted across the decks. This is the true story of who lived, who died, and why survival was never fair. Let's dive deep into the brutal hierarchy that sealed the fate of everyone on the Titanic. Musicians, 0% survival rate. The evening had been perfect, the spacious saloon resounding with the elegant sense of your music, a waltz, a ragtime, a classical number, every note guaranteeing the opulence and elegance of the Titanic. The shudder had been a slight interruption, but as the evening wore on, the requests for lighter, happier tunes began to dwindle. The air grew cold, the tilt of the ship more pronounced. Then the instruction, not from a commander, but from your band leader. Gentlemen, a little closer, if you please. You played on, hands cold and numb, your breath misting in the freezing air. For bravery, not terror. For comfort, not flight. You played hymns, popular songs, whatever to calm rising fear in the eyes of the passengers. The rhythmic creak of the davits, the distant splashes of the lifeboats splashing into the water were a ghastly accompaniment to your final concert. You heard the desperate screams as the ship began its final horrific slide, the roar of the ocean as it tore through the decks. And still you played, your music a defiant, beautiful hum amidst the chaos. Nearer, my God, to thee, the final piece, a final, heart-wrenching farewell. Not one of you made it through. Music versus terror, courage versus fear, legend. The backbone, first-class male crew, 16% survival rate. You were the engineers, the electricians, the central hub of the ship's intricate machinery. The gash was a catastrophic roar, followed by the horrific rush of water. Your purpose was to maintain Titanic's life, to maintain her power, her light, her breath. Damage reports, run the pumps. The engine room was a hopeless battleground against the invading sea. You labored insanely, amidst the hiss of steam, the clang of stuck machinery, the gurgle of water creeping up the soles of your feet. You knew the ship was gone, but you had duty to keep the lights aglow, to operate the pumps, to give every possible chance for the people on board. You stayed below deck, sacrificing your lives for others. The water rose higher, cold and bitter, until it engulfed the last light, the last engine. Your names are almost forgotten, your courage unrestrained. But your labor, your steadfast readiness in your places was, you died below deck, keeping the ship together as long as you could with your quiet living sacrifice. The loyal, lower stewards, third class, about 23% survival rate. You were the behind-the-scenes anchor of third class, carrying trunks, cleaning cabins, comforting passengers who dreamed of a new life. The jolt had been harsh, knocking you against a bulkhead. The ensuing silence was even more terrifying. Then the frenzied screams, the swell of water, the frantic pounding on closed doors. You may have escaped, saved yourself, but duty was second nature. You guided groups through the chaotic corridors, your voice steady, though your heart thudded in your chest. This way, ma'am, come with me. You pushed open doors, sometimes having to push them, clearing a way through terrified tourists. You had seen the desperate faces in their eyes, the children clung to the mothers. You had directed them to the top decks, to the promise of lifeboats, even as you acknowledged your own remaining chances with each passing tick. Most of you died, trapped within the maze-like lower decks, or drowning in the icy waters following the final plunge. Your dedication, your quiet courage, was your legacy. The martyrs below, firemen and trimmers, 24% survival rate. The engine spaces were a hell of roaring furnaces, the clanging of engines, and the stifling heat. You shoveled coal, your sweat-greased body shoving frantically, stoking the fires that propelled the mighty ship. The tearing sound, a nauseating rip that coursed through the hull, was unmistakable. The vessel had hit something and hit it hard. Water in boiler 6. The cries were somber, panicked, Your responsibility was plain: remain at your station, lights lit and pumps humming, earning precious seconds for those up top. Water boiled, cold and inescapable, about your ankles, your knees, the hiss of steam, the splutter of malfunctioning lights thick in the air. You labored right to the end, your muscles on fire, your lungs shrieking from the steam and smoke. The lights began to flicker and then went out, casting the engine room into a nightmare darkness, lit only by the gurgle of the incoming sea. No escape, no heroics. You died down below, trapped in the belly of the beast you had slaved for. Your passing, in those oppressive, waterlogged staterooms, saved others' lives, a quiet. The innocents lost, third-class children, 34% survival rate. You had been little, poor, lost. The third-class cabin had been a world of color, a raucous one, full of laughter and voices excitedly chattering about America. The crash was a deafening one, a shockingly violent, sudden boom that sent you rolling from your bunk. Your mother had scooped you up, her face a mask of terror. "What's happening, Mama?" you complained, clinging to her nightgown. "I don't know, mijito, I don't know." Doors, usually open, were closed or jammed by the listing ship. No warnings were received in your distant cabins, but only the icy black water creeping in under the door. You heard the screams of fright from adults, the desperate thump, thump, thump of people struggling to open doors. Your mother dragged you down groaning, dark, unfamiliar halls, the boat groaning ever deeper and farther. You stumbled, your little legs trying to keep up with the pace. The air stank of damp wood and terror. You heard other children crying, their wails being smothered by the crashing of water. Whoosh! When you finally reached the open deck, cold was a surprise, but glimpsing the few, half-filled lifeboats was horrifying. There was no kind of order here, only this wild jam of people. You were little, readily shoved aside. Your mother pushed you forward, her force Herculean, her voice a raw yell. "My child! Please, my child!" The gentlemen, first-class men, by 34% survival rate. The night had been one of sophisticated delights, a rich cigar in the smoking room, a shared brandy with fellow industrial giants. The jolt had been a faint shudder, a slight incident to be brushed away. Tuxedos were still smooth, conversations went on, but with a new background undertone of interest. "An iceberg, they say," one man said, a dry smile playing on his lips. "How inconvenient." But as hours went by, the truth would no longer be in denial. The deck sloped, first slowly and then with increasing surety. The shouts of women and children first were clear, adamant. You stood on the boat deck, your hair tossed back by the icy wind, a witness to the silent tragedy. Others of you helped others, leading terrified women, lending a calming word. "Go on, my dear, we'll be right behind you." Others, seeing advantage, boarded early boats. A subtle word with an officer securing their place. You could make decisions, and some of you did. Wealth brought options, but no protection. You watched your wife, your daughter, descend into the darkness, faces pale in the dim light. The music of the orchestra's sad hum drifted out across the deck, a cold accompaniment to the end. You watched friends, acquaintances, stand resolute, hands in pockets, staring into their deaths. You listened to the mad screams as the ship began its final plunge, the roar of the sea as it swept up the big ship whole. 1/3 of you lived. You clung to overturned boats, battled through the freezing water, your body in shock and numb to the cold. You were rescued, but the recollection of choices made, faces lost, would forever haunt your soul. The commanders, ship's officers, senior male crew, 39% survival rate. The crash had been a muted, gagging thud that jarred the bridge, and then the tearing sound of metal like a fingernail drawn down a chalkboard. As a senior officer, duty, discipline, and decision were your lifeline. Within minutes, you knew the truth. The ship was dying. "Report!" you snapped, your voice shattering the shocked silence. "Water in the forward compartments?" "Sir, quickly!" The boat deck was your battlefield. You shouted orders to uncover lifeboats, load women and children, your throat sore from bellowing orders. "Clear the lines. Lower away, port side. No men unless absolutely necessary." There was the clatter of davits groaning, ropes screaming, and the steady blood-curdling splash of boats hitting the water, filling your lungs. You saw the fear in passengers' eyes, the agonized moans of those who did not wish to leave their loved ones. You had to be the rock, the unyielding force. Some of you gave your lives helping others, pushing, shaking women into boats, cutting ropes. Others directed lifeboats. Your voice is clear in the mounting panic. Steady as she goes. Keep rowing. Keep together. The working women who escaped, first-class stewardesses, 87% survival rate. The scrape had sent a jolt up your spine, a sound like a giant fingernail dragging across a blackboard. You'd been turning down the beds in a suite, the scent of lavender sachets in the air. As a first-class stewardess, your world was one of meticulous service, anticipating every passenger's need. Now, the needs were different. The yells burst out unexpectedly, echoing along the shining corridors. All hands on deck, women and children into the boats. You weren't a passenger, you worked for them. Tonight, though, your uniform, your knowledge of the ship, your priceless job entitled you to stay aboard. You accompanied Mrs. Astor to her fur coat, drawing it up respectfully over her shoulders. "Are you warm enough, madam?" you asked, your voice betraying none of the internal trembling. Aboard, the chaos was directed, but crisis loomed. Officers bellowed orders, their breath clouding in the frozen air. You were escorting a bewildered old woman down to a boat when an officer, white-faced but resolute, grabbed your arm. "Stewardess, get aboard." Soothe her. He nodded toward the trembling woman you were leading. The ladies of luxury, first-class women, by a 97% survival rate. The evening had gone well. You'd enjoyed exquisite French food, the crystal clinking softly, the music of the orchestra, a hushed background to glistening conversation. Your silk dress, a new Parisian design, shone under the flashing saloon lights. The jolt, when it came, was so slight you'd half accounted it as a passing rolling of the sea. A small tremor, your husband had remarked, an eyebrow rising. "Perhaps we've rocked a pretty obstinate wave." But then the stewards began their rounds, their voices low, almost conspiratorial. "Just a small precaution, madam. We ask that all ladies and children proceed to the boat deck." There was no franticness, only a perfunctory sense of urgency. You wrapped your mink stole around your shoulders, the diamonds at your throat shining in the light. Up on the deck, the chill was biting, but otherwise surprisingly peaceful. Officers' faces were set in grim resolve, directing traffic with firm, reassuring voices. "Ladies first, please. Step lively. You were a first-class lady. Officers ordered you into the lifeboat now, even if your husband stayed behind." "My husband will come with me," you stated, voice steady, though a quiver of fright began to quake beneath your command. The untouchables, first-class children, 100% survival rate. Think of being 8 years old, swaddled in a fur-trimmed coat, holding your governess's hand. The cool, clear air of the North Atlantic smarted on your cheeks, but the wrapped-up layers of wool and fur kept the cold away. Inside, the ship had been a floating palace, a world of gleaming mahogany and soft-sounding whispers where your every desire was indulged. Just hours ago, you'd been giggling, chasing your reflection in the grand staircase's mirrored walls, the distant thrum, thrum, thrum of the engines a comforting lullaby. And then, the shudder. Not jarring, not violent, but low and vibrating. A hum that shook the ship's very marrow, a sound like a giant sigh. You'd hardly have noticed, so absorbed in the game your governess, Miss Finch, was playing with your teddy bear. "What was that, Miss Finch?" you'd asked, your voice small. She just patted your hand, a tranquil expression on her face. "Probably nothing." "Dear, maybe the ship just stretched." But then the stewards began rushing with a new urgency, their polite smiles a bit strained. A light knock on your cabin door, and a man in a crisp white uniform bowed his head. "Miss, Master, if you'll follow me." Just a precaution. When Titanic sank, it didn't just take lives, it exposed a brutal truth. Survival wasn't luck, it was status. Your class, gender, and job decided your fate long before the iceberg hit. Some were saved by privilege, others by duty, and many never had a chance. In the end, Titanic wasn't just a tragedy, it was a mirror. Who would you have been, and would you have made it out?